It was a bitterly cold night in the small town of Crestwood. The wind howled through the empty streets, rattling loose window shutters and sending dry leaves swirling across the pavement. Most people had retreated into the warmth of their homes, huddled under blankets, unaware of the unbelievable event unfolding just outside their doors. Under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, a stray dog trotted along the sidewalk, his fur matted and his ribs visible beneath his thin coat. He had no name, no home, and no one to care for him. Yet on this fateful night, he would become a hero. As the dog sniffed around an alleyway in search of food, a faint whimper reached his ears. His ears perked up. He followed the sound, his paws crunching against the frost-covered ground. Then he saw it, a small bundle, wrapped in a thin cloth, abandoned near a dumpster. Inside, a tiny baby shivered violently, its face pale from the cold. The stray dog didn't hesitate. He knew what he had to do. But what happened next would leave an entire town in shock. Hello everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel. Before starting the full story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories. The town of Crestwood was not kind to strays. The streets were lined with small houses, their chimneys releasing faint streams of smoke into the icy air. The people here lived simple lives, busy with their own struggles, rarely sparing a thought for the homeless animals wandering the alleys. And among them was a dog, a nameless, forgotten creature. His fur, once golden, was now dull and matted with dirt. His ribs pressed against his thin skin, a reminder of the many nights he had gone without food. Yet, despite his hardships, his eyes still held a quiet intelligence, a glimmer of hope that refused to fade. He had learned long ago that humans were unpredictable. Some would throw him scraps, others would chase him away with shouts and kicks. Trusting them was dangerous. On most nights, he scavenged through trash bins, hoping for a leftover sandwich crust or a discarded bone. When the weather was mild, he slept curled up in the shadow of a building, keeping his body as small as possible to conserve warmth. But tonight, the cold was relentless, and his usual shelter, a broken-down shed behind a bakery, offered little protection from the bitter wind. He needed to find food, and he needed to find warmth. Nose to the ground, he followed familiar scents down the alleyways, past overflowing dumpsters and locked restaurant doors. A few days ago, he had found half a sandwich behind a cafe, and he hoped to be lucky again. But as he reached the spot, he found nothing but a few soggy paper napkins. His stomach growled in protest. With a sigh, he moved on, his paws pressing into the frost-covered pavement. The town was quiet, the streets empty except for a few flickering streetlights. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, not a stray, but one of the lucky ones, a pet with a home. A sharp gust of wind made him shiver. He needed to find shelter soon. Turning a corner, he approached a small alley where the air was slightly warmer, thanks to the heat venting from a nearby building. This was a place he had rested before, though it was never truly safe. If the restaurant owner saw him, he would be chased away. But tonight, exhaustion weighed heavy on his limbs. He just needed a few hours of rest. As he settled down, his ears twitched. Something was different. A sound, faint, weak, not the usual rustling of trash or the scurrying of rats. It was a whimper. His body tensed. Another stray, a wounded animal? Slowly he rose to his feet, sniffing the air. The sound came again, barely audible over the wind. Something was out there, something small, something helpless. Curiosity and instinct pushed him forward. He had no idea that what he was about to find would change his life forever. The stray dog's ears twitched as he stood in the dimly lit alleyway, his body alert. That sound, weak, fragile, wasn't something he could ignore. It wasn't the growl of another dog or the scratching of rats in the garbage. It was different. It was something struggling to survive. Carefully he followed the noise, his paws crunching lightly against the thin layer of frost covering the ground. The wind howled, rattling the lids of nearby trash bins. He sniffed the air, searching for a scent that might tell him what lay ahead. What he smelled was strange. Not food, not another animal, something else, something human. As he moved deeper into the alley, his eyes landed on a small, crumpled bundle near an old, rusted dumpster. The cloth was thin, barely enough to block out the biting cold. And then it moved. The dog took a cautious step closer. Another weak whimper escaped from inside the bundle, followed by a tiny, shuddering breath. He could feel it now, soft, warm, alive, a baby. The dog's head tilted slightly as he studied the fragile creature. Its tiny fingers peeked out from the folds of fabric, its face pale, its lips trembling from the cold. It was barely breathing. The dog didn't understand human words, but he understood survival. He had lived through brutal winters, shivering under doorways, searching for warmth wherever he could find it, and he knew this small creature would not survive much longer. The baby let out a weak cry, barely more than a whisper against the wind. The dog's instincts kicked in. He couldn't leave it, but what could he do? He looked around, hoping to see a human nearby, someone who would come and take the baby to safety. But the alley was empty. No footsteps, no voices, no open doors. The town was asleep. The dog hesitated, glancing back at the child. The baby's breathing was getting weaker. He had no choice. He moved closer and curled his body around the baby. His fur, though not thick, was warm compared to the icy air. He pressed himself against the small bundle, using his body heat to keep the baby from freezing. His heart pounded. But this wouldn't be enough. The baby needed real warmth. It needed shelter. The dog glanced toward the street. Somewhere out there, humans could help. But would they listen to him? His mind made up, he carefully took a corner of the cloth between his teeth. Gently, cautiously, he lifted the baby. With slow, careful steps, the stray dog began walking. Where? He didn't know, but he knew one thing. He had to find help before it was too late. The stray dog moved cautiously through the frozen streets, the baby cradled gently in his jaws. Every step mattered. He had carried scraps of food before, but this was different. This was life. The fragile bundle barely weighed anything, yet its presence felt heavier than anything he had ever known. The icy wind cut through his thin fur, but he ignored his own discomfort. The baby's breathing was growing fainter. He needed to move faster. The dog trotted toward the main street, his paws pressing into the snow-covered pavement. He needed to find humans. They always had warm places, soft things, food, things that could save this tiny creature. But as he neared the rows of houses, a new problem arose. Would they listen to him? Humans often shooed him away. He was used to the sound of doors slamming, the sting of thrown stones, the sharp words telling him he didn't belong. Would this time be different? He had to try. He approached the nearest house, its windows glowing with warm light. The scent of food drifted through the air, warm soup, fresh bread. Inside, humans sat comfortably, unaware of the desperate struggle happening just outside their walls. The dog let out a sharp bark, then another. He scratched at the door with his paw, his breath visible in the freezing air. No one answered. He whimpered, his tail wagging slightly, hoping to seem less threatening. Still, nothing. He stepped back, glancing at the baby. The tiny body trembled slightly, its breaths uneven. There was no time to waste. He turned and ran toward the next house, and the next, and the next. Each time the response was the same. No doors opened. No one came. Panic settled in the dog's chest. What could he do? For a brief moment he thought about stopping, lying down, curling around the baby until the sun rose and warmth returned. But he knew better. The night was too cold. The baby wouldn't last that long. He needed another plan. The dog's ears perked up as he heard the faint sound of movement in the distance. A human, walking. He turned toward the sound and spotted a figure moving near a street lamp, a woman, bundled in a heavy coat, a bag slung over her shoulder. She walked quickly, her breath visible in the cold air. A chance. The dog bolted toward her, his heart pounding. The woman noticed him immediately. She stopped, eyes widening at the sight of the stray carrying something in his mouth. She gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. For the first time that night, the dog felt hope. Help had finally come. Claire's heart pounded as she took a step forward. At first, she thought the stray was just another dog wandering the streets, but as he came closer, she saw the tiny bundle cradled in his jaws. Her breath caught in her throat. "Is that—" She dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she reached out. The dog hesitated for a moment. His instincts told him not to trust humans, but something about this woman, her soft voice, her warm eyes, felt different. Carefully, he lowered the fragile bundle into Claire's waiting arms. The moment the cloth shifted, revealing the pale, shivering face of a newborn baby, Claire let out a sharp gasp. "Oh my God, a baby! How—" She didn't waste another second. Instinct took over. She pulled the baby close, pressing it against her coat to share her body heat. Its tiny fingers twitched slightly, but its breathing was weak, too weak. It wouldn't last much longer in this cold. She had to act fast. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered, wrapping the baby securely in her scarf. Then she turned back to the dog. Where did you find them? The dog simply stared at her, panting lightly. His deep brown eyes held something unexplainable, urgency, desperation, maybe even hope. Claire glanced around. The streets were empty, no sign of anyone searching for a missing child. Who would leave a newborn out here in the freezing cold? It didn't matter right now. What mattered was getting help, immediately. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers stiff from the cold. But as she pressed the screen, she realized with a sinking feeling her battery was dead. No time to panic. She looked down at the baby. Its lips were turning a frightening shade of blue. Claire made a decision. She had to get to the hospital herself. She turned toward her car, parked a few blocks away. The dog followed close behind, his tired legs still moving with determination. He wouldn't leave now, not after coming this far. As they reached the car, Claire quickly opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, cradling the baby against her chest. She hesitated for a brief second before glancing at the stray. "Come on," she said, patting the passenger seat. The dog hesitated, his body tensed as if waiting to be rejected, but when Claire nodded encouragingly, he carefully jumped inside. She turned the key. The engine roared to life. With one last glance at the baby, Claire whispered, "Hold on, little one." Then, with the stray dog beside her, she sped toward the hospital, racing against time. Claire's car tore through the nearly empty streets, tires skidding slightly on the icy pavement. The baby lay bundled in her arms, its tiny chest rising and falling faintly. The stray dog sat beside her, his eyes locked on the fragile child as if willing it to survive. The hospital was only a few miles away, but every second felt like an eternity. Claire could hear the baby's breathing, soft, shallow, fading. "Stay with me, little one," she whispered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The dog let out a soft whimper, sensing the urgency. His tail flicked anxiously, his body stiff. He had done his part, but would it be enough? Finally, the bright red emergency sign of Crestwood General Hospital came into view. Claire slammed on the brakes in front of the entrance and threw open the door. "Help! Someone help!" she shouted as she rushed toward the doors. A nurse and a security guard ran toward her, confusion and concern written on their faces. "What happened?" the nurse asked, reaching for the bundle in Claire's arms. "I found this baby outside," Claire gasped. "He's freezing. He's barely breathing." The nurse's eyes widened in horror. She immediately cradled the child and shouted over her shoulder, "We need a doctor now!" Several nurses and a doctor rushed forward, whisking the baby inside. Claire stood frozen, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. The stray dog stood at her side, watching as the hospital doors swung shut. "Hey, what about the dog?" the security guard asked. "Is he yours?" Claire shook her head. "No, he's the one who saved the baby." The guard frowned, clearly skeptical, but before he could say anything, Claire knelt beside the dog and stroked his cold, matted fur. "You did good," she whispered. "Really good." The dog looked up at her, his dark eyes filled with something Claire couldn't quite explain. Loyalty? Gratitude? Or maybe, just like her, he was waiting to see if the baby would survive. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Claire paced back and forth in the waiting area, her nerves on edge. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face unreadable. "How is the baby?" Claire asked, bracing herself for the worst. The doctor exhaled deeply, then gave a small, reassuring nod. "Alive. Cold. Weak, but alive." Claire felt a wave of relief wash over her. "But," the doctor continued, "if you hadn't gotten him here when you did, he wouldn't have made it." Claire let out a shaky breath. She turned to the stray dog, who was watching her intently. He had saved a life tonight, but this was only the beginning. The hospital lobby was quiet, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional beep from the reception desk. Claire sat on a plastic chair, her body tense with exhaustion and adrenaline. Beside her, the stray dog lay curled up on the floor, his head resting on his paws, his ears twitching at every distant sound from the emergency ward. The baby was alive. That thought alone should have brought Claire relief, but questions buzzed in her mind. Who had abandoned the child? Why? Would anyone come looking for him? A nurse approached her with a gentle smile. "Are you the one who found the baby?" Claire hesitated, then glanced at the dog beside her. "Not me. Him." The nurse looked down at the scruffy animal and chuckled. "You're saying a dog saved that baby?" "I know how it sounds," Claire admitted, "but I saw it with my own eyes. He carried the baby all the way to me." The nurse's expression softened. "That's incredible." Claire reached down, scratching the dog's ears. He leaned into her touch, sighing as if he finally felt safe. For the first time, someone was treating him as more than just a stray. Just then, the doctor returned, his face serious. "The baby is stable," he said. "He was dangerously cold, but we managed to warm him up. We're running tests, but it looks like he'll be okay." Claire exhaled in relief. "Thank you." The doctor's expression darkened. "The police have been notified. They'll want to speak with you." Claire nodded. She'd expected that. But before she could respond, a voice interrupted. "Excuse me, I heard what happened." A woman in her 60s stood a few feet away. She had short gray hair, warm brown eyes, and a thick scarf wrapped around her neck. "I'm Martha," she said, stepping forward. "I run the local animal shelter." Her gaze flickered to the dog. "I couldn't help but notice this little guy. He's quite the hero, isn't he?" Claire nodded. "He really is." Martha crouched down, her fingers reaching out hesitantly. The dog sniffed her hand before allowing her to stroke his head. "He's been around town for a while," Martha murmured. "I've seen him now and then, always alone, always surviving. People mostly ignore him." Claire frowned. "Why? He's clearly special." Martha sighed. "Stray dogs don't get much kindness around here." She looked at Claire. "But tonight he changed everything." Claire glanced at the dog, who looked up at her with trusting eyes. She couldn't just leave him now. "Would you take him in?" Martha asked gently. Claire hesitated. She had never owned a pet before, and her job at the hospital kept her busy. But as she looked at the dog, the one who had carried a helpless baby through the freezing night, she knew she couldn't turn away. She reached out, ruffling his fur. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I will." The dog's tail wagged, just once, but enough to make Claire smile. She had saved a child tonight, but in a way, this dog had saved her too. Claire didn't waste another second. She wrapped the baby in her thick coat, making sure to cover his tiny hands and feet. His skin was still icy to the touch, but his shallow breaths gave her hope. She cradled him close to her chest, feeling the faintest warmth return to his fragile body. The stray dog, his fur damp from melted snow, stood beside her, watching her every move. His golden brown eyes were filled with concern, as if he understood the urgency of the situation. "We need to get him to the hospital, fast," Claire muttered, her breath visible in the cold night air. She hurried to her car, the baby nestled securely against her. Just as she reached the driver's seat, she hesitated and glanced back. The dog was still there, standing in the dim hospital parking lot, his tail low, unsure if he was welcome. Claire didn't even have to think. "Come on, boy," she called, opening the passenger door. For a moment, the dog hesitated. Then with a shake of his fur, he leaped into the car. He wasn't going to leave the baby now. Claire slammed the door shut and started the engine. The heater roared to life, filling the car with much-needed warmth. As she pulled out onto the road, she glanced at the dog sitting beside her. He was staring intently at the bundle in her arms, ears twitching with every little whimper the baby made. "It's okay," Claire whispered, as much to herself as to him. "We'll get him help." A desperate drive. The streets of Crestwood were eerily empty at this hour. Snow flurries swirled under the glow of the streetlights, covering the asphalt in a thin white layer. Claire tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her heart pounding. Her phone buzzed. It was the hospital's emergency line. "Claire, where are you?" a voice asked urgently. "I'm on my way," she said quickly. "I've got an abandoned baby with me. Severe hypothermia. I need a team ready the second I arrive." There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then, "We'll be waiting. Drive safe." Claire pressed the accelerator a little harder. The baby stirred slightly in her arms, letting out a weak, breathy cry. It was barely a sound, but to Claire it was everything. He was still fighting. "You're going to be okay," she murmured. "Just hang in there." Beside her, the dog let out a soft whine, his gaze fixed on the baby, as if he too was praying for the child to survive. Arriving at the hospital entrance came into view. Red emergency lights blinked against the snowy backdrop. A group of nurses and doctors stood at the doors, waiting. The hospital entrance came into view. Red emergency lights blinked against the snowy backdrop. A group of nurses and doctors stood at the doors, waiting. Claire barely had time to put the car in park before she threw open the door. The dog jumped out first, his paws landing on the icy pavement. He didn't run away. He waited, watching as Claire carefully carried the baby inside. The moment she stepped through the sliding doors, a doctor rushed forward, taking the child from her arms. "Severe hypothermia," Claire explained breathlessly. "Found outside in the cold." The doctor nodded sharply. "We'll do everything we can." The baby was whisked away. Claire stood frozen, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. The weight of the situation finally hit her. Then, Something warm nudged her hand. She looked down. The dog had followed her inside. Claire knelt, running a hand through his fur. "You did good, buddy." The dog licked her fingers, his tail wagging slightly. For the first time in his life, someone was telling him he had done something right. Claire watched as the hospital staff rushed the baby down the hallway, his fragile body wrapped in layers of warm blankets. A doctor shouted orders, nurses moved swiftly, and the hum of machines filled the air. The moment was chaotic, but filled with hope. The stray dog, still damp from the melting snow, sat by the entrance, his golden brown eyes never leaving the sight of the baby. He didn't bark, he didn't whine, he just watched, waiting. Claire exhaled deeply, her breath shaky. "Please make it," she whispered, her eyes locked on the double doors that had just closed behind the medical team. The fight for life. Inside the emergency room, the doctors worked tirelessly. "The baby's temperature is dangerously low," one nurse reported. "He's lucky to even be breathing," another doctor said, placing small heated blankets around the tiny body. The baby's skin was pale, his lips nearly blue, but his heartbeat, though weak, was still there. Faint. Fighting. They placed him in a specialized incubator, raising his body temperature slowly. Warming him too quickly could be dangerous. For what felt like an eternity, the hospital staff monitored every tiny breath, every flicker of movement. Then, a small cry. It was weak, barely a sound, but to everyone in the room, it was a miracle. "He's responding," a doctor said, relief washing over his face. "He's going to make it." A town awakens to the news. Meanwhile, outside in the waiting area, Claire slumped onto a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The stray dog lay beside her feet, his tail curled around himself for warmth. A nurse approached with a soft smile. "The baby's stable." Claire let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "He's okay?" The nurse nodded. "It's incredible. He was moments away from—" She hesitated, unwilling to say the words. "But he fought through. He'll need monitoring, but he's alive." Claire glanced down at the dog, scratching behind his ears. "He saved that baby's life." The nurse looked at the dog, eyes filled with admiration. "Seems like he knew exactly what he was doing." The media takes notice. As the sun began to rise over Crestwood, news of the incredible rescue spread like wildfire. Doctors talked about the unbelievable survival of the abandoned baby. Nurses whispered about the heroic stray who wouldn't leave the child's side. By morning, the story had reached local news stations. Reporters gathered outside the hospital, eager to tell the world about the stray dog who became a hero. A journalist approached Claire. "Is it true? A stray dog carried an abandoned baby through the snow?" Claire glanced at the dog sitting faithfully by her feet. She nodded. "It's true." A camera flashed. The world was about to hear the unbelievable story of the dog who refused to let a baby die. The morning light cast a golden glow over the hospital parking lot, but inside the atmosphere was tense. Police officers had arrived, their uniforms crisp, their expressions serious. The news of the abandoned baby had spread rapidly, and now the authorities were determined to find out who had left the child in the cold. Claire stood near the waiting area, watching as Detective Mark Holloway reviewed notes with his team. He was a seasoned investigator, known for his sharp instincts and relentless pursuit of the truth. His piercing blue eyes flicked to Claire as he approached. "You're the nurse who found the baby?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Claire nodded. "It wasn't just me," she said, glancing down at the stray dog curled up at her feet. "If it weren't for him, the baby wouldn't have made it." Holloway studied the dog with curiosity. "So, the dog actually carried the baby here?" Claire hesitated, trying to put into words how surreal it all was. "Yes, I saw him outside acting strangely. When I got closer, I realized he was protecting something. That's when I found the baby." One of the officers spoke up. "We checked security cameras around town. The footage is incredible." The shocking footage. The police had pulled up footage from street cameras positioned near the alley where the baby was abandoned. The grainy black and white clips showed the stray dog cautiously approaching the bundle in the snow. At first, he nudged it with his nose, circling it as if unsure what to do. Then, in an act that defied all instincts of self-preservation, he carefully picked up the baby in his jaws and began walking. "He carried that child across town in the freezing cold," an officer murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. The footage continued. The dog stopped at several houses, appearing to seek help, only to be shooed away or ignored. Still, he pressed on, determination evident in every step. Then, the final clip. He reached the hospital, where Claire spotted him. "It's like he knew exactly where to go," another officer said. Detective Holloway nodded thoughtfully. "This dog is more than just a stray." He turned back to Claire. "Now we need to find out who abandoned that baby." Following the clues, the hospital had already provided the police with the baby's medical details. He was a newborn, barely a few hours old when he was found. His body showed no signs of abuse, but he had clearly been left outside for too long. Detective Holloway turned to his team. "Check missing persons reports. Interview residents near the alley. Someone had to have seen something." An officer approached. "Sir, we found footprints near the alley, small ones, likely a woman, and there were tire tracks nearby. Could mean she was dropped off or left in a hurry." Holloway's jaw tightened. "Then we have a lead." Claire, listening intently, couldn't help but ask, "What will happen to the baby?" "For now, Child Protective Services will take over," Holloway said. "But the mother, wherever she is, might need help too." The stray dog's fate. As the officers continued their work, the dog lay beside Claire, his head resting on his paws. She reached down, stroking his fur. "What happens to him?" Holloway sighed. "Legally, he's still a stray." Claire felt a pang in her chest. "That's not right. He saved a life." Holloway studied her for a moment, then gave a small smile. "Maybe it's time he had a home." Claire glanced down at the dog, who wagged his tail slightly. She had never considered adopting a pet before, but as she looked into his warm brown eyes, she realized maybe fate had brought them together for a reason. The investigation was just beginning. The mystery of the abandoned baby was far from solved, but one thing was certain: the stray dog had already changed lives, and his journey wasn't over yet. The news spread like wildfire. By the next morning, every television screen, radio station, and social media platform was buzzing with the incredible story of a stray dog who had saved a newborn's life. Hero dog saves abandoned baby from freezing to death. Stray dog becomes guardian angel in the most unbelievable rescue. The small town of Crestwood, once quiet and unnoticed, had become the center of national attention. Reporters from major news outlets flooded the streets, eager to capture the story firsthand. Camera crews set up outside the hospital, waiting to interview the staff and, if possible, catch a glimpse of the heroic dog. The town's reaction people, who had once ignored the stray, now saw him in a completely different light. Just a few days ago, he was nothing more than an unwanted street dog, scavenging for scraps, shooed away from doorsteps. Now, he was a local legend. Strangers gathered outside the hospital, hoping to see the dog with their own eyes. Some brought food, others blankets, and a few even knelt beside him, whispering words of gratitude as he wagged his tail softly. "He's not just any stray," an elderly woman murmured, watching the dog through teary eyes. "He's an angel," children pointed excitedly. "Mom, that's the hero dog. Can we pet him?" Even shop owners, who once chased him away from their doorsteps, now left bowls of food outside. For the first time in his life, the dog was being treated with kindness. Claire's decision. Inside the hospital, Claire watched the chaos unfold from a window. She couldn't believe how quickly everything had changed. The dog, once invisible to the world, was now the heart of the town. She knelt beside him, scratching behind his ears. "Looks like you're famous now," she said with a smile. He leaned into her touch, his tail thumping against the floor. A doctor approached, holding a clipboard. "Claire, I just got a call from the mayor's office. They want to honor the dog." Claire blinked. "Honor him? How?" "A ceremony at the town square. They're talking about a medal, maybe even naming him an honorary citizen." Claire chuckled. An honorary citizen? That's a first. But as much as she was happy for the dog, she couldn't shake the feeling that he needed more than just recognition. He needed a real home. She took a deep breath. "I want to adopt him," the doctor smiled. "I had a feeling you'd say that." The search for the baby's mother. Meanwhile, the investigation into the abandoned baby was still ongoing. The police had released a public statement urging the mother, or anyone with information, to come forward. Detective Holloway sat at his desk, reviewing the footage again. The small footprints in the snow, the tire tracks. It all pointed to someone young, someone desperate. Just then, his phone rang. "Detective Holloway?" he answered. A hesitant voice came through the line. I think I know who the mother is." Holloway's grip tightened on the phone. "Go on." The lead they had been waiting for had finally arrived, and soon the full truth would come to light. Detective Holloway gripped his pen tightly as he listened to the hesitant voice on the other end of the line. I I didn't want to say anything at first, the caller continued, her voice trembling. But when I saw the news about the baby, I knew I couldn't stay silent. Take your time, Holloway said, keeping his voice calm. Tell me what you know. The woman hesitated before finally speaking. There's a girl in my apartment building. Her name is Lily. She's only 17. She's been hiding a pregnancy for months. Holloway exchanged a glance with his partner, Officer Riley, who had been listening in. She had the baby 2 nights ago, the woman continued. But now she's acting like nothing happened. I don't know where the baby is, but when I saw the news, I had to call. Holloway felt a tightness in his chest. They had been searching for the mother since the night the baby was found. Now, at last, they had a name. Thank you for coming forward, he said. We'll take it from here. Finding Lily. Within an hour, Holloway and Riley were outside a small, rundown apartment building on the outskirts of Crestwood. The place was quiet, the windows dark except for one on the second floor. They knocked on the door. A moment later, it creaked open, revealing a pale, thin girl with tired eyes. Lily Carter? Holloway asked. Lily's eyes widened, and for a split second she looked like she might slam the door shut. But Riley quickly spoke, her voice gentle. We're not here to hurt you, Lily. We just want to talk. Lily hesitated, gripping the edge of the door. I don't know anything. Holloway sighed. We know about your baby, Lily. We just want to understand what happened. Lily's breath hitched. Her grip on the door loosened and her shoulders slumped. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered. The truth comes out. They sat at the small kitchen table, the air thick with tension. Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she finally spoke. I didn't want to leave him, I swear, but I was scared. My parents, they would never forgive me. I had nowhere to go, no money, no help. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I thought if I left him somewhere, someone would find him. I didn't know it would be so cold. I didn't know. Her voice broke. Riley placed a reassuring hand on hers. You made a mistake, Lily, but you can still do the right thing now. Lily swallowed hard. Is he okay? Holloway nodded. He's safe, alive thanks to that dog. Lily let out a shaky breath. Can I see him? Holloway exchanged a glance with Riley. That's not up to us, but if you're willing to cooperate, we can make sure your side of the story is heard. For the first time, a flicker of hope crossed Lily's face. She nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. A town that forgives. Back at the hospital, Claire watched as the stray dog curled up beside her feet, unaware of the world-changing events unfolding. Little did she know, the next chapter of this story was about to begin. The hospital buzzed with reporters and visitors eager to catch a glimpse of the stray dog who had become an overnight hero. But amidst all the attention, the dog, now lovingly called Buddy by Claire, remained as humble as ever, lying quietly at Claire's feet. For the first time in his life, Buddy had a full belly, a warm blanket, and a gentle hand stroking his fur. He didn't understand why people were suddenly so kind to him, but he knew one thing: he felt safe. A new beginning. Claire had always loved animals, but she had never owned a pet before. As she watched Buddy rest beside her, she felt an overwhelming sense of connection. He wasn't just a stray dog anymore. He was family. The thought struck her suddenly, making her heart race. Could she adopt him? Before she could dwell on it, the hospital director approached. Claire, he said with a smile, I know you've grown attached to the dog. The town is talking about finding him a proper home. Would you be interested? Claire looked down at Buddy, who wagged his tail slightly at the sound of her voice. A smile spread across her face. Absolutely. A home unlike any other. That evening, Claire drove Buddy to her apartment. He sat in the passenger seat, his head poking out the window, his ears flapping in the breeze. As soon as they arrived, Claire led him inside and watched as he cautiously sniffed around, exploring his new home. It was small but cozy, far better than the cold streets he had known all his life. She placed a soft dog bed in the corner of the living room, but to her surprise, Buddy curled up near the couch instead, as if he just wanted to be close to her. Claire chuckled. All right, you win, but no jumping on the bed, okay? Buddy thumped his tail against the floor, making Claire laugh, adjusting to a new life. The next few days were filled with firsts for Buddy. His first bath, he wasn't a fan of the water, but he tolerated it. His first collar, he scratched at it for hours before finally getting used to it. His first home-cooked meal, he devoured it so quickly that Claire had to remind herself to feed him slower next time. Most importantly, it was the first time in his life that he didn't have to fight for survival. At night, as Claire sat on the couch reading, Buddy curled up at her feet, his soft snores filling the room. "You're safe now, Buddy," she whispered, and for the first time, he truly was. Meanwhile, as Buddy settled into his new home, the investigation into the baby's abandonment continued. Lily had agreed to cooperate, but the town was divided. Should she be punished for what she did, or should she be given another chance? The decision would change everything, and through it all, Buddy remained unaware that his journey was far from over. The town of Crestwood was still buzzing with the miraculous story of Buddy and the abandoned baby, but as the headlines faded, the focus shifted to the young mother, Lily. She sat in a small, dimly lit office at the police station, hands trembling in her lap. Across from her, a social worker named Margaret and Officer Reynolds exchanged glances. "We know you were in a desperate situation," Margaret said gently, "but abandoning a baby in the cold could have had tragic consequences." Tears welled in Lily's eyes. I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. I thought no one would find him, that maybe it was better that way." Reynolds sighed. "Why didn't you reach out for help?" Lily swallowed hard. "I was scared. I have no family, no money, no home." Her voice broke. "I love my baby, but I didn't think I could give him the life he deserved." Compassion over punishment. The town was divided. Some people believed Lily should face legal consequences for endangering her child. Others felt sympathy, recognizing her as a young girl who had made a terrible mistake out of desperation. Claire, who had been following the case closely, couldn't stay silent any longer. She requested to meet Lily. When the two women sat down, Claire studied her, the exhaustion in her eyes, the deep sadness in her face. "I don't know you," Claire said softly, "but I do know one thing. You never stopped loving your baby. If you had, you wouldn't be crying like this." Lily wiped her tears but said nothing. "I work at the hospital. The baby is safe now, but he needs more than just medical care. He needs a future." Claire hesitated. "I want to help you, if you're willing." Lily's eyes widened. "Help? Me?" Claire nodded. "There are shelters, programs for young mothers, resources you probably don't even know exist, but you have to want it. Do you?" Lily burst into tears, nodding. "I do, more than anything." A town's decision. After much discussion, the authorities decided not to press charges. Instead, Lily was given access to support programs, counseling, and temporary housing. Some people were outraged. Years passed, and the town of Crestwood never forgot Buddy's incredible act of bravery. His statue stood proudly in the town square, a reminder of the night when a simple stray dog became a hero. People often stopped by to take pictures, leave flowers, or just pat the bronze version of Buddy's head for good luck. But time moved forward, as it always does. Buddy, once a nameless wanderer, had spent his final years in warmth and love, with Claire by his side. He had become a town treasure, loved by all. But like all great heroes, his time eventually came to an end. One peaceful evening, Buddy passed away in his sleep, his head resting on Claire's lap. His departure left a hole in many hearts, but his legacy remained stronger than ever. And then, something incredible happened. A familiar face returns. One crisp autumn morning, a young man arrived in Crestwood. He was in his early 20s, well-dressed but with a look of deep emotion in his eyes. He walked through the town square, pausing in front of the statue of Buddy. For a long moment he stood there in silence, staring at the bronze figure of the dog that had once saved his life. The baby Buddy had rescued all those years ago had grown up, meeting Claire. He made his way to Claire's home, nervous but determined. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. "Mrs. Claire?" he asked hesitantly. She nodded, her heart pounding. "My name is Daniel," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I think you know who I am." Tears welled up in Claire's eyes. She reached out, gently touching his arm. "Oh, my dear boy." They sat down over tea, and Daniel listened intently as Claire recounted every detail of the night Buddy had found him. He had heard the story before. His adoptive parents had told him many times, but hearing it from Claire made it feel real in a way he had never experienced before. A life shaped by a hero. Daniel had grown up knowing he was adopted, but he never felt lost. He had always known that someone, something, had given him a second chance at life, and that something was a stray dog. "I owe my life to him," Daniel said softly. "I came back because I wanted to do something in his honor." Carrying Buddy's legacy forward. Daniel had been studying veterinary medicine. Inspired by the story of Buddy, he had dedicated his life to helping animals in need. And now he had an idea. "I want to expand Buddy's Haven into something bigger," he told Claire. A full rescue and rehabilitation center for strays, not just in Crestwood, but beyond. Claire's heart swelled with pride. That's exactly what Buddy would have wanted. A story that never ends with Daniel's help. Buddy's legacy continued to grow. The rescue center expanded, saving countless animals, giving them a chance at a better life, just like Buddy had given him. People from all over came to learn about the incredible stray dog who had saved a baby, and in doing so, changed the world around him. And so, even though Buddy was gone, his story lived on, in every dog that found a home, in every life that was saved, in every heart that believed in second chances. Because one cold night, a stray dog chose to be a hero, and that choice changed everything. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share Buddy's story with your friends and family, because kindness, no matter where it comes from, has the power to change lives. Would you give a stray animal a second chance? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in the power of love, loyalty, and second chances, like this video and subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Remember, even the smallest act of kindness can make a world of difference. Who will you help today?